Welcome today to the seminar named Bringing Localization of Aid into the Context of Sexual Violence, a Survivor-Centered Approach. LM International is organizing this event, and we are very happy to be here to discuss this very important topic. Because the existence of gender-based violence and conflict-related sexual violence has for decades been a severe challenge in countries such as Sudan, the DRC, and more recently in the Ukraine. This has attracted international attention, both regarding international funding, media and local presence. But what has the connection been to local communities as implementers, and as well as to the localization agenda itself? Localization has repeatedly been confirmed to be the right decision, not only because it's considered morally and ethically right, but also more and more evidence from research are indicated that is what brings the best results. Today, we are trying to address this by applying an approach such as the survivor-centered approach, which Roger here, who is with us in the panel, will describe a bit further. But when bringing localization of aid into the context of sexual violence, we are challenged to work differently. The core argument is that we need to strengthen a survivor-centered approach, survivors of sexual violence, while at the same time providing partnerships, practice with local and national actors to better recognize and respond to their respective perspectives and leadership, as well as adapt accordingly to the more rooted advocacy. To LM International, this is an important aspect in our work daily, but it's also why we want to bring this into this discussion here today. And with me, I have a distinguished panel. Two of them are here with me today. The first one is being Roger Bohendwe, working as a human rights activist at the Pansy Foundation in the DRC, also a partner to the Swedish organization PMU. Sofia Kaltorp, she's here as the ambassador of gender equality to the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Online, digitally, we have Esperande Birgemana, who is the founder and also activist of the SEMA network, which is a global survivors network for survivors of sexual violence. And we also have Susanne Aldén, working as head of development cooperation at the Swedish Embassy in Burkina Faso. But my first question will be directed to you, Roger. You're coming from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and we know this is one of the most complex humanitarian crises that we're seeing today in the world. It's also a context where sexual violence and conflict has been very highlighted, and it was at one point it was even doomed the rape capital of the world. And with that label, a lot of media attention came, a lot of focus came to the situation from the international community. But it was very single focused on that specific topic, leaving out the complexity. And in one way, one could say it was quite driven from a donor perspective. And Roger, having worked for the last 20 years with sexual violence in conflict, with toxic masculinity and human rights in general, what have you seen as a consequence of this focus from the international community?
Thank you very much for the question, Maria. What we have seen from the ground is that aid has taken a colonizing physiognomy. The hand that gives is above, and the hand that receives is down. The work we want to do on the ground mostly is to decolonize aid. Those sending aid, they decide what aid activities need to be set up. And then they set a series of indicators and the impact they want to see. But these indicators were not first thought from the needs of the survivors on the ground. There are the people who were in their offices who thought of the change they want to see and how they want to see them in people. So these women survivors on the ground, they don't have a choice. They just bow in front of the aid that they receive. Yet, they receive it without any kind of dignity. So they do what they're asked to do and the way they want it to be seen. That is element number one. The element number two is we want to build resilience. And to build resilience to these women, there is a kind of capacity, and the capacity, they need it. And they need the capacity to kind of match with their needs. Their needs have to be met. And yet it's not that, from what I said before. So we have to allow the survivors. In fact, decolonizing aid is to allow survivors live their dreams, not dream their lives anymore. They have faced difficulties and they know ways out. It is their lives. We cannot build their lives without them. Otherwise, it will be doing it against them. So these women we encounter, we work with at Panzi, they easily tell you, from our worries, from our pains, we can transform. We can transform our pains to power because we know how we live them, we know how we survive them, we know how we can overcome. We can change, we can transform our challenges into opportunities. Because we met our challenges, we know them, and we know the opportunities ahead. But yet, they are not given this possibility. The third thing is the people that we are in organizations. The organization, be them local or donor organization. These donor organizations, in fact, are the center of the aid, not the women. These donor organizations have networks, they have platforms, they have these task forces for the women. And they sit together to decide what they want to see. But in these big offices that we said before. So they come with the aid, and these women who in fact give their hands like beggars, they receive orders from the money that they receive, from the aid that they receive. This is what we want you to do. This is what we don't want you to do. And yet it neglects their capacity of creation. The very bad name they are given is vulnerable. Vulnerable to mean people incapable of any thought, incapable of any innovation, not able to go forwards. So they will be there, made knelt until they bow that what you want to do is that. So they don't have right to refuse, they don't have right to correct, they don't have the right to say what I want to do and how I want to do. So these, in fact, are, these elements together is the very bad image that aid is having. And that is why, in fact, for some organizations on the ground, impact takes time to come. Because the very affected people don't do what they wanted to do to go out of their former situation and transform it.
It's a bleak image that you're portraying, actually. I mean, we are all sitting here, and most of you guys are working with international aid, and it's kind of sad to listen to this, that we haven't gotten further, because we've been discussing the same topic for so long. We are really not moving ahead, clearly. And I think that's why this discussion about decolonizing of aid and the localization of aid needs to be further pushed. We need to find what are the instruments, isn't it? And I think it would be, thank you for highlighting what it actually means to individuals in the field. And from your perspective, I also want to invite Esperanza to also address the same topic and the same issue, sitting from your perspective then, Esperanza, working as with a global network, but also working on a national level and on a very, very communal level. What's your take? What's your reflection on what Roger is saying? What examples have you seen in your context?
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Thank you, Roger, for speaking for survivors and people where the voice are just ignored. Working with on a global survivor network and also on Pepisa Survivor Network in South Africa. So we learned in a hard way during the COVID time, where everyone was locked in the house. So it was very interesting that no one was able to remember that gender-based violence, it's a reality now in the houses, you know, and don't talk about where there is a war. No one was there for us, not even able to have a communication means. So it's just women trying to fight for themselves while these NGO, locally or internationally, are closed and forget the role they play in the life of survivors. But we were able to have one organization called Act Bumbano, which is in South Africa. So we approached them. We tell them that, you know what, survivors are suffering and no one really is helping them. So they were able to come and break their own rules of donuts, which means you must show your account and how many editor you already have, this whole requirement. And that's the only organization was able to hear, and they give us small money so we can survive a little bit for a whole year of COVID when the COVID started. We learned in the hard way that it's not easy funds to come to local organizations. But also being a survivor myself and working with survivors and organizations, survivors from around the world, there is a huge challenge. Because most of organizations which really deal with the survivors activists are threat to the government. So most of the organizations I know, they are not registered in their own country. So for that reason, as Survivor Network, you are not really allowed to apply funds because you don't have what's really required by international funders or even local funders. So that means you live on their own hand when they want to come to visit you and they say you can do this and that, but not really what you want, what they want, you know. But again, you're gonna do it because you want your voice to be out or to be visible. So I think that's the most challenge always we are facing. And I think even if you can go for research within the network, I mean, SEMA have like 20 countries, networks, which are local. So when you look, most of them, none of them have funds, although they are active in their own countries. Why? Again, when the survivors or women raids, it's because of the need. Most of the time we are activists against what happened to us. And we come in this whole network without having really skills maybe, and the requirement that the international NGO or aids need. So most of the time you get rejected and then you need to follow whatever they say, which is really tiring and not easy. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Yeah, because you were mentioned also when we spoke, when we spoke before this talk, you were saying that that specific thing, that organization, Act Bumbano, by the way, a partner to a Swedish organization called ACT Church of Sweden, I should say. Yeah, but the Act Bumbano, they were actually came to you quite often, NGOs, all communities, you were expected to live up to a certain standard, but they came, we're seeing the core activities you're doing are great, and what you don't have, we can come and support. If I understood, yes, that was also what they said.
Yeah, that's what we proposed them, because we were wanting to report what's going on just in the community where we are. And they say, okay, if you want to report, we need to send a person who's gonna train you and they collect your information, and then we'll be able to publish them. And then we say, yes, that will be helpful. And also they say, we will train you guys to do it. But since you don't have a capacity yet in the beginning, you will be sending to us whatever ads you send it, and we'll be able to publish. That's how they helped us.
Thank you, Esperanza. Sophia, being now the ambassador of gender equality in Sweden, but also the coordinator of the Swedish Feminist foreign policy, if we evaluate the Swedish feminist policy, foreign policy, and the work also against sexual and gender-based violence, how can we change these power dynamics, would you say? And how can you, and also including then challenging international aid to movements that are not organized according to the structures that we kind of want, but are extremely important for societal development.
Thank you very much, and I just would like to say that I very much appreciate Roger and Esperanda's sort of outspoken account of how they see aid and the support given by countries such as Sweden to the very, very important work of survivors, and sort of the localization agenda and what is needed to bring that forward. What I think, and where the feminist foreign policy comes into place, is of course aid has to be seen in a context, and we need to really, if we want to change the way things are done, we need to really take a holistic perspective, not only looking at aid as a sort of transactional relationship, where we sort of try to support victims in different ways through different log frames that I really fully understand are not the way to go, but to really take that holistic perspective. And the feminist foreign policy that the Swedish government launched 8 years ago is in itself very much a tool aiming at changing power dynamics, because it is about putting women at the center, see how we can really address the structural discrimination, including the violence that women are facing throughout the world. So it is really a policy aiming at changing those power dynamics at different levels, looking at the rights, the representation, and the resources of women. So I mean, a lot has been done. I'm really pleased that there are now 8 more countries that are pursuing this holistic feminist foreign policy approach in order to see how we, through those different tools, can change the way things work, and I think really address the issues that's been highlighted by Roger and Esperanda. How can we make sure that the aid and the support that is given at local level is really addressing the issues that the women themselves see as key issues? So, I mean, obviously we need to work, I think, very much with the local organizations and very much in a listening mood, see how we can provide support. From the Swedish perspective, what we have done, a few of the things that we've done over the 8 years, is that we have now a new strategy. It's not very new, actually, it's 5 years old, but we have a specific strategy looking at gender equality, and a key part of that is to see how we can support umbrella funds that in their turn can really see how they can give unearmarked support to grassroots organizations. I think that's one key, to give unearmarked support to local organizations in order to make sure that the needs as articulated by the people concerned are met. And I mean, on that note, also you mentioned it, Roger, talking about vulnerable groups, and I very much agree with you. I think that we need to move away from that type of language, and we need to put the survivors at the center, their needs, but also their abilities to change their lives, and how can we support that through those various means.
But when we talk about funding as well to these vulnerable groups, or also, like we said, to groups, social movements, in the OECD DAC guidelines, in the collaboration with civil society, it does address that we, as a global north or as a donor community, need to be better at identifying these groups and getting the funding directing. Can we talk about more flexible funding then?
No, I think
funding structures.
Definitely, and unearmarked funds is one flexible funding mechanism that Sweden is very much at the forefront to pursuing, both in terms of our support to international organizations, but also very much at the local level, to see how, because I think that flexibility is key, to make sure that local organizations have flexibility, that we provide flexible funding, but also long-term funding. I think that's also a very important issue, to make sure that local organizations do not need to spend their times, applying for new funds every year. But how can we make sure that there is a sustainability and a long-term perspective in the funding that we provide in a flexible manner? But again, I really think that the holistic perspective, it's important, because obviously we have the Paris principles, the whole sort of aid architecture, which is very much also rightly so, putting the states in the center. I think there is also a complexity there that we should not shy away from discussing, where we also need, as a donor, make sure that we support the local organizations by political dialogue with the governments concerned, because I know, Congo is one, I would say in all of those countries there are issues of conditions for working, and there I also think that we can provide support by really putting pressure on those governments to make sure that the local organizations are mandated to work and operate freely.
Thank you. We do also have a member, or Susanne Aldén with us, working at the embassy in Burkina Faso. From your perspective, then, sitting there, out there, now here we have someone at the headquarters, and then you have your counterpart, Susanne, being in countries that Sweden is supporting aid within. What does localization mean to you at the embassy?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion. And I first just want to say, listening to Roger and to Esperande, obviously it's very it becomes very clear why this approach is crucial and needed, and who's better placed to actually talk about it and to respond to the needs and the priorities of the people that we are trying to assist, and people who are actually by their side. So I fully hear, and I can also concur a lot of what you've been saying. But the question then is, and then my perspective here from working at an embassy, and I'm trying, to have a more sort of a general view. This is not Burkina specific, but the question that we pose ourselves and ask ourselves is, how do we make sure that we can be better at promoting this localization agenda? And as simple and as logical as it sounds, the localization agenda, unfortunately, it is not as simple and straightforward as you might initially think. But I think what it does, and which is very important, is that it pushes us to start thinking about how we can and should be doing development better or differently, to use another famous terminology. But we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution, and I think this is where it gets a bit tricky, because we need to contextualize it, and different countries have different prerequisites to actually be able to pursue a certain specific way of this approach. But it does challenge ourselves, and we have to challenge ourselves to look forward and for ways to increase localization in our development work. I completely agree. But like I said, what do we mean by it? I mean, if we sort of start to go back a few years to the grand bargain discussion and talking about 25% of aid should be channeled to local organizations or national organizations, but then that was tweaked a bit, and so we sort of stepped away, and other international organizations who had country offices could also get a bit of that money. So it is not, it already started to be less clear what we actually mean when we talk about local ownership or localization, right? So we talk about local ownership a lot, but at what level are we talking about this? And this is something that we discuss a lot at the embassy and with our partners. So how do we make sure that we are not reproducing some of the power dynamics that we are trying to actually work against? How can different interpretations of local also maybe risk adding to exclusion? If we look at, if we just look at, I'm based in a capital, a lot of the NGOs, local NGOs, national NGOs are based in the capital. And in a country like Burkina Faso, which is quite small, it's maybe not as complicated, but in a big country like DRC, between Kinshasa and in the field, it's a huge difference. And so who are they representing if you're at the national level, you're a national NGO? Is there a risk that we are actually also still reproducing the same power dynamics that we are trying to, avoid reproducing? And who are we supporting? Who gets access? If we launch call for proposals, who gets access? Is it, open to everyone? We may say it is, but who actually gets access is a language question, of course. It's also where you're based, where you get your information from. So I think, there are different things here that we need to sort of look into, and we as donors, collective donors here, not just Sweden, we need to think about these issues, and we need to start dismantle what this is actually about when we talk about localization. And there's also, of course, this whole shift with many donors that we're looking at more program-based approaches. And so we want to give bigger money, more money to fewer organizations, which is in a way maybe contradictory to a localization agenda, depending on what kind of capacity you have in the countries. So we need to also find that balance to not exclude one or the other. I think another issue is, we're willing and see that as a donor, we are also seen by others as willing to take risks, and we are encouraged to take risks. But what does that actually mean when at the same time we have a quite rigid system for internal steering and control, and to make sure that we are not supporting the misuse of our funds, and that's just why, and Esperanza was into this as well, why organizations need to have, why we're asking them to provide specific documentation and the audit reports, etc., because this is one of our control mechanisms, and so we're willing to take risks, and when it works, it's great. And of course, these issues exist also with the international organization. It's not exclusive in any way, but just to say that there's a it is believed by many, and that international organizations, they have more backstopping from headquarters, they have a better or more experience in managing large amounts of funding, and so of course there is that issue to consider as well. But I think it's very important that despite all of this, we need to find ways, and there are ways that we can find to actually include local organizations more, and make them become a bigger part of the development cooperation and development aid that we are promoting. And the complexity of localization and the need for it to be contextualized should not be an excuse for us as donors not to try and find these ways and mechanisms to support local organizations better and better.
Well, what I'm hearing, Susanne, as well, you're saying there's a bit of self-critique here, or self-reflection. You were mentioning your own systems might not be set up to be so flexible. How much of this, now Susanne and Sofia now, how much, I mean, on a rhetorical level, you can say this to us and talk about this, talk about it. But how much is SIDA and the MFA as a donor actually working on this internally as a donor? Maybe I should start.
Yeah, if I may, I think that Susanne, she really outlined the complexity of the issues and the issues and questions that we really are grappling with. But I think, and I was part of negotiating the ground bargain and looking back, really that partnership, and it's been mentioned, but because the bargain is about us as donors understanding the complexity and the realities of the local organizations and how we can support them better. But there is also a partnership where the organizations need to understand some of the systems and challenges that Susanne outlined. So really, how can we create those partnerships at local level first, I think, and at the embassies where Susanne and her colleagues are doing a great job, but also possibly more at the systemic level, I mean, with the bigger INGOs, the UN, etc. Because my sense is that we need more of that dialogue and partnership to understand where we are both coming from and find a way forward. Definitely the unearmarked sort of aid and the general support that many organizations receive from SIDA is one way to go. But really, how can we foster more of a partnership in the spirit of the ground bargain? That's something I've been missing since the ground bargain was adopted in 2016.
And also looking into possibly also new ways of partnership, because what we're seeing as well is that we are quite into our own silos. As NGOs, the development sector, we work with us, the private with themselves. We are not having that as much as we could have seen possibly, new forms of new sorts of partnerships, maybe with private sectors. But I'm also going back now to you, Roger, and looking at the situation in the DRC. I know at the Panzi Hospital, your approach has been very much to work with a holistic model for survivors, looking at the person's different needs, coming from their own perspective. But you were also mentioning something, how you try to implement that in, maybe you should say very briefly what it is, but then again, how do you implement that in a rural context where you might not have all the resources coming from the bigger NGO community being present? Because like Susanne was saying, DRC is such a vast country.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciated this way of saying that bonds of collaboration should start between the donor organization and us who are receivers of the aid. Yet, we should, first and foremost, put in the center of all these discussions the survivor, so that this person is not my woman. What brings it bad is that she becomes my woman, and then we deny her all qualities of humanity, and then we use her as, well, as a person of, or a thing of business. And then we report figures to the organization who are very, very much in our reports. It's like, well, 20 women, 1,000 women. It's like these numbers are what are very necessary to the people. But what steps of development did these women find? What changed in their lives? How did they come from wood to a bit of improvement? This is, in fact, all these qualitative things maybe are not very interesting to some of the organizations, be it on the ground or the donor organizations. Not more of them look at this. But then, what do we do at Panzi? When a woman comes, in fact, it's like, in French, I would say à la carte. It's like you go in a place where you go to seek care. They have the ranges of alternatives to give to you, but you choose. You are still right to choose. What do you like? There are these 4 kind of pillars for the holistic care, and the very first and the medical care. And the woman, when she receives medical care, and that from her wounds, from her problems, she feels relieved and creates the bond of relationship between her and the doctor. It's only then that she can tell, you know, I was raped. If then she says, I was raped to the doctor, because this bond is, and it doesn't have to be forced, the doctor may ask the woman, would you like to see another person who is more specialized than I am, because I didn't do everything. Then if she accepts, she agrees, she has the corridor to go to see a psychologist. And there are psychologists over there, and she may talking just like a person and can make the choice which psychologist she chooses. Of course, there again, we don't have like 1,000 psychologists. Some of the ones who are there, she still can choose one she wants. It's only then that they show her this and this and these are okay. So you need to go back home. 2 things happen. Either she was outcast and rejected in the community, or she is not wanted. All these left behind women, we don't just tell them, time for hospital is finished, please leave. No, we bring them to a place safer than their home. It is a transit place, yes, yet they have to have it. They go there, and there we show them a range of things they can do so that they create their capital of resilience. And they have to choose. No woman will say, not the Panzi will say, do literacy, and then school this, and then you do sewing, and then you do bakery. She has to choose. If she thinks that the opportunity is easy to her when she goes back to recreate her life, to restore herself, her self-esteem and dignity, she may say, well, I think one of my gaps were, I don't know to count, I don't know to read. Literacy then. She chooses. We don't say, program 1, program 2, no. It is just, you choose, you start. And at a time you say, I think I know a bit of this. I want to do sewing. And then she goes to the sewing course. When she finishes, we try to do that, create bonds with the place where they have to go by mutualizing their forces, putting them together, because it's only together that they are strong. And we put them and other women who didn't undergo the same problem, but living in the community, having almost the same problems, to go to create a group of people who have the same problems, if we want to say clear, a community. So they go to create their community, they fight for their objectives, they have their vision. They fight for that. So they know the means, they know how to do that. It is easy that it's not Panzi. Yes, it's not, it's in rural places. But yet in rural places, we have a person like me, like Madame, who has a small place She has one sewing machine or two. Maybe we have 10 machines at Panzi, but there is somebody in the community who has one machine. She still can go to do that. Since she is so connected with that person, the work of the organization will be to lay the bridge between the woman and that local thing, that local person. So this is it. This is what we're asking. And maybe this person, you will not say, Panzi have the papers. This person will not have the paper, I'm sure. But is it possible that we make dialogue between that person and the woman who comes from Panzi? Panzi do the follow-up because Panzi has the paper and Panzi report back. Is it kinds of these dialogues lack? They don't exist. So this is it. And I think it doesn't need to be so huge so that it comes. It is, in fact, I come back to what I said before, decolonizing. If we decolonize, we leave them do what they want, as they want, surely that they have their objectives, and their objectives are not that big vision. It is, I do this, I can feed my children, I can send them to school, I can find them medicine. What is investing for sustainability if it is not that projecting people for future? These women are ready to do that. They don't have enough education, yes, but they know that a child to struggle for tomorrow challenges has to go to school, and they send them.
So this is an example of a method that you're using, but also what I'm hearing that you're saying, you're placing choice at the center of it all. Choice as leading to the sense of empowerment as a source of strength. Yes. And I would like you, Birgimana Esperanza, to comment on that when we end, the importance of choice as a survivor. But you've spoken about models here on how to apply this. And Susanne, working at the embassy, you are, what kind of models have you seen that one could apply to work with actors who are not organized, who might be like these local movements or women's organization that, for example, Esperanza is representing? What models have you seen?
Thank you. No, but I think that there are, as you said previously, that I was being self-critical, and I think this is important. We need to continue to be self-critical because that's the only way we can move forward and make sure that we do development better. So, it all ends up or sort of boils down to how flexible we as donors are when it comes to the funding that we give, right? And I will respond to your question, but I also want to just sort of add on to what Roger was saying, and the fact that, asking the people that we're supposed to help what they need and the organizations that represent them. I think, these kind of collaborations, and you were talking about the partnerships, Sophia, I think this is it. We need to build those partnerships with the organizations that are closer to the people than we are as donors. And we are convinced that local organizations and movements, all of them are the key to successfully implement what we are trying to implement. And international organizations, they confirm this. In here, they don't have access a lot of times, but the local organizations, they do. So, I think what we need to improve is how we include the women or whoever we are trying to sort of reach with our assistance. In this, now we're talking about sexual violence, so a lot of them are women. Include them in the conceptualization of the programs that we are trying to support. And I think going through local organizations, but also channeling, if we channel it through an international organization, but make sure that the local organizations are included in the conceptualization, in the follow-up, are getting a fair share of the funding. And we as donors, we have a responsibility here to make sure that we have a dialogue about that. When we're forwarding funds, who get the funding? How much are they getting? Are they getting a fair share for the work that they're doing? It boils down, of course, to overhead costs and admin costs, and this can be discussed and negotiated. This is not a fixed amount here. We could have a flexibility, and we are, I encourage ourselves to have that. When it comes to networks and these movements that are maybe not as organized as we require them to be in order for us to fund them directly, I think there's another way. The same. There are ways that we can look at who can be an intermediary, but in that discussion as an intermediary, make sure that that partner is willing to forward the funding to the movement, because we can't have the systems can't be too rigid if we actually want to reach out to as far out in the line and the chain as possible. So. And there are examples, in DRC, for example, there's a women's movement that was supported by Sweden initially, and has continued to be supported, but as what started as a program initiative, a project initiative, actually now is the support of a movement, but through an intermediary. And other donors have joined, and this is maybe a solution to it, that you find an intermediary that could forward the funding, and that could be but where the movement itself is part of setting the agenda, and that the movement in this case don't just become the receiving end of something that they have not been part of shaping. And so same for the survivors movement. How can we make sure that the survivors' voices are heard, and that the funding is being channeled to address those needs that are being presented? So I think we need to make sure that we have that flexibility. And another thing that I would like to take the opportunity, so also mention, like the current system that we have here when we have a bilateral strategy, is that we have all our funding is tied to specific contributions, and it doesn't leave a lot of flexibility to support local initiatives, ad hoc initiatives that may come our way, even if we find them interesting. And we then need to find ways that we could support them, and we can't, of course, impose on our partners to take on specific activities. So that's another thing, when we have this system that we have today, maybe we need to think, about how can we have, what are the possibilities to have a more of a flexibility in supporting local initiatives on an ad hoc basis, that are smaller initiatives that we today actually have quite a difficulty to support, even though we believe in them. Thank you.
Thank you. Esperanza, listening to these discussions that we've had here now, coming from a survivors movement in South Africa, but also working on a global level, what have you seen of positive examples besides the one you mentioned during the COVID? Do you have any comments on what we've heard here, on these suggestions? What would you see more? What would you like to see more of, for example?
Yeah, I think it's always important to use a model of holistic approach. For example, I'm from SEMA, I'm a member of SEMA, which it is supported by Mukwege Foundation. So every year we had retreat, which really we talk about our vision and objectives ourselves, while we are supported by Mukwege Foundation, but it's from our own understanding, different to the context, because you may feel like whole survivors have the same need. No, we don't have the same need. So that's the reason holistic approach was very important for Mukwege Foundation to support SEMA members. And it comes and they train us in whatever skills that we don't have, and then we do the work. And they're always asking the question, that's what you want? And then we say yes or no. If we say no, it goes. They don't take it. So that's holistic approach. And it gives dignity to survivors. And the field, the project we are learning, it's arts, is not for Mukwege Foundation. Although Mukwege Foundation play a big role in supporting arts with the skills and sometimes with funds, but they don't really tell us what to do. No, we are the fond of vision and objectives. They just only create a platform, and then we use the platform, and they take it from there.
Thank you so much, Esperanza. We're actually coming to the end of this discussion. I've appreciated all of you who've shared so boldly and been self-reflected and challenging ourselves. And I think we all need to challenge ourselves in this very difficult but also promising opportunity that we have, because it seems like this discussion now, even though it's been going on for a long time, it's even more urgent now, and there are even more active steps being taken by donors such as Sweden, by civil society organizations on all different levels. But I would like to give you 15 seconds, it will be. You will get to say, what do you take away from this discussion today? And may I start with Monsieur Roger.
What I take out from this is that I understand that we stop to be human beings if we cannot stand near a human person who is having sufferings.
Sophia.
I mean, a holistic approach with the empowerment of the survivors at the center, how do we, through partnership, contribute to that? I'm looking forward to continue that discussion.
Thank you. Susanne.
Thank you. That we need to really listen into the needs and the priorities of the people that we are trying to help in order to do development better.
And Esperanza.
I wish to see in the future international organizations or international UN, peace building, international organization coming together and work together to solve the problem of the world. Just working hand in hand, and just the powers being together. Thank you.
Thank you. And from my side, as your moderator of this seminar, I take away that choice is empowerment and is being empowered. And that means that all of us sitting in here, listening to this, has the opportunity to make a choice. And I think we all should make that choice, trying to see how we, in our respective ways, can make localization real, so that we can actually be part of creating a more inclusive society for all. Thank you so much from LM International, over and out.